All right, here we are. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this month's episode of Coffee with Kate. And I am so happy to have Phil Mershon with me today here. Hey,
Woo!
Phil,
How are
thank
you?
you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me here.
And I actually will admit I have water in my Coffee with Kate mug.
Mine has hot tea,
There you
so
go. So it's tea or water or whatever with Kate and Phil.
there you go.
So anyway, thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited to have you in front of my audience, and I'm sure that we're going to have people joining us. I've invited a lot of people, and I want to just share a little bit of information about who Phil is. Some of you may know exactly who he is. I had the good fortune of meeting Phil in June at Jessica Phillips' Social Media Week Lima event. And when I heard that Phil was going to be there, I've heard so much about you through many friends, through Vivica von Rosen, through Jessica Phillips, of course, and so many who have known you through social media marketing world, which is the premier event that you are personally responsible for. Well, you and Mike Stelzner. So I'm going to just read a little bit of your bio from your book, and we're going to be talking about your book, Unforgettable, today. So Phil is the director of experience for Social Media Examiner. For over 12 years, he has created amazing customer experiences at events like Social Media Marketing World and the Social Media Success Summit. Throughout his 30-year career, Phil has been creating memorable experiences for businesses like Coke Industries, as well as nonprofits, schools, and churches. He is also a jazz saxophonist, and stay tuned because he might actually play for us. Pickleball enthusiast and a songwriter. Phil lives in Wichita, Kansas with his wife, Audrey, and their 3 adult children and their standard poodle, Millie, the therapy dog. Tell us a little bit about Millie before we dig in.
Oh, Millie is awesome. She is all black. She is amazingly fun, but she's also really gentle with kids. Like my daughter has a red fox lab, and when they get together, they look like two dogs who are just having a fight. But then if you get Millie around a small kid or someone in need, she becomes a very caring, nurturing person. So she has a personality. If you see her in the front seat of the car, you would think she's a person.
I
She
love
looks
that.
like one
How
the
old
way
is
she
she?
sits up. She's 4.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yep.
Well, we have my friend Bob Farnham is on. Hi, Bob. He's actually in Vermont. And I know Bob knows who you are as well. And he certainly knows about Social Media Examiner and Social Media Marketing World. So let's start with that, Phil, is that's how a lot of people know you, and you have been working with how many social media marketing world events have you actually done? Have you done all 12?
We've had 10.
10.
We would
Okay.
have had 11 if it hadn't been for that little COVID thing.
That little COVID thing.
Yeah, so we've had 10. I've been part of all of them. They're at the beginning. I've been with Social Media Examiner as a contractor starting in 2010, and
Okay.
then I've been there as an employee since 2012.
Tell us how you came on board with Social Media Examiner.
So if you remember the Great Recession of
Mhm.
2009, I was living in San Diego, moved out there to be a pastor at a church. Was doing that part-time with the promise that it would become full-time by 2009, but the Great Recession interrupted that plan.
Mhm.
Giving dropped dramatically at the church, and I was working part-time at a school at the same time, and that's where Mike Stelzner sent his kids. And so
Oh,
I was business manager, and Mike volunteered as a marketing. I wouldn't call him director. He was just a volunteer in marketing.
yep.
He helped us do a bunch of things. And so when he found out that the school was going to have to let me go with their funding situation, he said, "Hey, I've got an empty office. If you need a place to camp out while you're looking for your next gig, come on over." And so I did, because I thought that was probably smart to get out of the house and have somewhere to go. Um,
Mhm.
and so I did that. And the second day I went back, he said, "Hey, do you want some work?" I'm like, "Yeah, anything to make unemployment last as long as I can is a
Right.
good idea." So I started doing some small project work for him in January of 2010 and kept doing that throughout that year. I moved from San Diego and was living in Florida for a while and moved back to Kansas. And he just kept sending me small projects here and there. And
Mhm.
then by November of that year, he said, "Hey, I like your work. Would you like a more regular contract?" And he offered me an opportunity to step on as director of summits as a contractor because he
Mhm.
wasn't incorporated. And, not knowing or not realizing that I had the background in events that I did, and I
Right.
hadn't put it all together. Up
Right.
until that point in my life, I've been doing it, but I hadn't put it together that this is actually an expertise of mine.
Mhm.
Um, and so began doing that. And then in 2012, we said, hey, we should do a conference. Actually, Mike said that. And I said, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do a conference, having no idea what I was saying yes to. But we did. And then in 2013, we did the first one. So I think it was a providential thing where
Mhm.
I was in the right place, right time, but over time realizing that actually I had the right skills to do what I ended up doing.
Right.
And we partnered. I
Mhm.
didn't know everything I needed to know. We partnered with an agency who specializes in putting on events. So that ended up being the perfect marriage, with having them involved with Mike and me and a couple other people.
That's so interesting. I always love to hear story. I'm all about story. And it's always funny to hear the little stories about how we ended up where we're doing things. So I want to ask you, if that first social media marketing world was in 2013, how many attendees that first year? Do you remember?
I think we had 1,100 total. It was between
1,100.
1,000 and 1,100, somewhere in there.
But then it's grown to how many attendees over the last few years?
At our peak prior to the pandemic, we hit 5,000.
Wow.
Um, the year of the pandemic, it dropped, but I think a lot of people backed out last minute,
Mhm.
or were hesitant because they were hearing the rumors. I talked to someone even earlier this week who was supposed to be there, but decided not to go because of fear of catching it, and she was pregnant. So I know
Oh,
there
right,
were a
right.
lot of those stories that were out there.
Mhm.
So, and then since the pandemic, the numbers have been lower than that, but still
Yes.
strong.
I think that's kind of the case for a lot of events I've gone to. I mean, I've gone to Inbound, which is, of course, is in Boston, put on by HubSpot. I've gone to some of those big ones, and I think that's happened with everybody is that they're just and you know what? Sometimes the smaller size is more intimate and more fun anyway.
I agree. Bigger is not necessarily better.
Exactly. Right, right. Well, that's a good segue. So we're going to be talking. Phil is also the author of his newest book, Unforgettable: The Art and Science of Creating Memorable Experiences. And he talks about in his book about how events can be memorable and how we can make them interesting. And so it was interesting to hear your talk at Social Media Week Lima about creating unforgettable experiences. So, one of the things that's in your book that I loved was, I think it was the name of a chapter actually, is "No More Boring Events," and I love that. So, talk to me a little bit about, just tell me kind of where that comes from, and then we'll dig deeper.
Well, nobody likes going to a boring event where it puts you to sleep. Um, those aren't the events that I'm necessarily concerned with, the ones that are
Right.
charitable. The ones that I'm concerned with are the ones that feel like they're more mindless,
Mhm.
like they're the required meetings that you have to go to, or they are the ones that lull you to sleep, not the ones that put you to sleep immediately where you get up and leave.
Right.
They're the ones that they're interesting enough but they actually don't impact you, and I call that inoculation. Um,
I
it's
like
like
that.
getting injected so you won't catch the flu. It's like, we don't really want you to have a great idea at this event, so we're gonna give you enough of a good idea, but it actually ends up being forgettable.
Right.
So I define boring as forgettable, not
Okay.
boring as terrible. Terrible events are actually better for you than a boring, forgettable event.
Right.
So that's what I'm on a mission to stamp out. And I think a lot of people are, and these virtual meetings can be like that so often, right? And
Exactly.
too many conferences we go to, you walk away saying, you might have had a good time. So, think about our time in Lima. And Lima is not a good example of what we're talking about here, but let's say you went there and you had a great time, but you don't remember anything that happened. You don't
Mhm.
remember a conversation that might be transformational, something that you've taken away. I
Right.
got challenged to start a YouTube channel at that conference, and I did.
Mhm.
I didn't have one going actively
Oh, you
before that.
didn't?
Now I do. I've had a channel for years, but I
Yeah.
wasn't using it
Wasn't
actively.
really doing much with it. Same with me. I've only started to kind of reinvigorate that this year too.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by it. It started with this, and I tell this story. I was in line at a conference, and a lady was asking, "So what's your big idea?" Because we were at this conference to figure out how do we document our big ideas on video.
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, mine is I want to help stamp out boring events." And she said, "Please do it." Every time my husband goes to these required company meetings, I think he wants to kill somebody. Just hates it that badly.
Right.
The passion in this lady was intense. It's like, yes, ma'am, I'm going to do it because you've given me a strong reason. And I think that's the feeling a lot of people have when the boss says you got to go to this meeting. It's like, oh
Absolutely.
no, not another meeting.
Well, let's break this down then. So there's different types of events, of course. So there's like an event like Social Media Marketing World, which brings all kinds of people. It either brings people in the industry, right, who are in social media marketing. It also brings the people from businesses and places who want to come and learn cutting edge things. But then there's the events that are maybe the more corporate events where it's like mandated type of thing where people have to go. And there's virtual events. So maybe talk to me about the difference about each one of those and kind of, then we can maybe talk about how we make each one or give a tip about how to make each one of those, unique.
Which one do you want me
So
to start with?
let's start with the bigger event, like the social media marketing world type event, the more global event, if you will.
I mean, there's one thing that's in common with every event that you go to that you plan, and those of you who are in charge of it need to think about who is the customer and what does their journey and experience with that event look like. So this doesn't matter if you're going on a retreat, it's a virtual event, it's a
Right.
large corporate event.
Mhm.
The more people coming, the more profiles that you need to have, avatars, if you want to use our marketing language. What do those avatars look like so that we understand their experience that they're going to have? What have they been doing before they ever go? So it's a virtual event. This is actually challenging because they're going straight from what they were working on a minute ago, like Melinda, whatever she was just
Yeah.
doing. Now she's here.
Mhm.
So that bridge that she crossed was momentary. And
Mhm.
it's also very quick to go back to what she was doing before or doing something else.
Mhm.
Someone's made the trip from Wichita, Kansas, where I live, to San Diego, California, where our conference is. There's a commitment involved. I'm here. It's going to take more for me to say I'm going to leave, but the potential is there. And thank you,
Mhm.
Melinda. I'm glad you're still here.
Melinda is also, she's in Vermont, a dear friend of mine and a mentor.
That's
And
amazing.
so the fact that Melinda is here really makes me happy. So thanks for being here, my dear.
So that's where I would start with any event that I'm looking at. Okay, what's that journey look like? Why are they coming? What are they hoping to get out of it? When you're doing a large corporate event like a social media marketing world, then there are diverse paths. Everyone's into hyper personalization these days. We
Right.
all have our smartphones with
Mhm.
our Spotify or whatever app that you use for your playlist. We all like to be able to choose what we're listening to. We all like to have our own personal Netflix experience, or again, wherever you watch on Prime or whatever streaming service you might use. We're used to being in charge of our
Yes.
experience. Then we come to a conference where we're all being forced to do the same thing,
Mhm.
which may or may not be what I would have chosen to do in that
Right.
moment. So the larger the event, the more optionality you've got to create to
Mhm.
allow people to create their own experience. If you're going to a social media week Lima, we knew going into it that we're all doing the same thing for 2 days. That's like
Right.
very clear on the agenda. And yeah, I do have the choice to step out into the lobby to do something different if one of the sessions doesn't quite float my boat. Uh,
Mhm.
but those are kind of the options. But the bigger conferences, people are looking for more options to keep it interesting. I need to know. We've got Bob and we've got Melinda here. We've got Kate here and we've got Phil. We might be
Mhm.
four completely different avatars. And I know
Yes.
there's a lot more people watching. So I'm planning for you and I'm trying to anticipate what are you going to be interested in doing at each moment of the day? How do I keep you engaged? How do I give you the experience that's going to go from being just ordinary to extraordinary, from
Right.
being boring to being memorable, from being forgettable to unforgettable? Um,
Mhm.
what are those things going to be? And that means I've got to know you. I've got
Right.
to know what you like. I've got to know what's going to actually intrigue you. And it's not just before you show up. I've got to be paying attention while you're there.
Right.
And bigger events means I've got to have a staff doing that. So
Mhm.
I think we were talking pre-show, when you're doing it by yourself, that
Yeah.
gets exhausting. But if a large event, you've got to have staff that are very attuned to what are customers saying, who are even willing to create those experiences right there in the moment. And I think,
Right.
a lot of it, and again, this is true no matter which size of event you're at, you're trying to create some kind of unexpected
Mhm.
moment that's something that's going to surprise and delight people.
Well, I was
Yeah.
just gonna say delight. We're trying to delight people. We're trying to educate them, build awareness, we wanna always give them a takeaway and a tangible that so that they can walk away with not only having a great experience, but they actually learned something and can put it into use in their business or what have you.
Yes.
I'm curious when you talk about this, you must over the years doing social media marketing world, which is a huge event. You must really take into account like the surveys. You must do follow-up surveys to get feedback. Talk a little bit with us about that, please. And by the way, I just want to say if anybody is watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, please put any questions for Phil in the chat and we will get them answered here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Surveys are critical. They help us know, one, how did the speakers do?
Hmm.
So we want to know if a speaker did well. Should we invite them back?
Hmm.
Is there any way that that speaker could grow? Did we get the right content? If for an educational conference, not all events are educational, but if it's educational, you want to know, did you hit the mark?
Right,
Uh,
exactly.
Paid for education. Did they get the education that they paid for? Uh,
Hmm.
we want to know that. And so we're asking that in a variety of different ways. Right now, we're doing a survey this week that gives us an idea of what people still want to learn about middle of the year. And
Right.
it's not just for the conference, but it helps inform what should we have available at the conference.
Hmm.
We're asking, if you're a social media marketing world customer, tell us what you think.
So are you
So
doing like a pre-event survey and then a post like a follow-up survey?
we just do a mid-year. So we
Okay,
normally
mid-year.
do
Okay.
a survey in January that's kind of our industry report, and then we do
Mhm.
something mid-year, and this it's a little bit later this year than it normally would be, but it just helps us to know, are we all of the content that we produce, not just the conference, is it
Right.
dialed into the needs of our customers? We want to know.
Okay.
So we ask a variety, and so it helps us for our conference know, do we have what we need?
Mhm.
Or do we need to adjust anything? Do we need to find some speakers to talk about topics that weren't on our plan? So that kind of data is important. But then also we're asking general questions, what about the experience? Did you enjoy? What didn't you? And
Mhm.
when you've been doing a conference for 10 years, coming up on 11,
Yeah.
and you've got people who've been there for many years, there's
Mhm.
things that they remember that we used to do that they either liked or didn't like. And now there's things that we did or didn't do that they either like or don't like. And
Right.
so
Right.
we have to look at it collectively and say, what can we address? What can't we? But it's super important for us. And then conversations with people who've been are also important. So we'll do focus groups, we'll do one-on-one conversations with
Mhm.
loyal customers just to hear them out and try to get a sense of, are we on the mark? What do we need to shift? What do we need to change? Because you don't want to just plan in a vacuum, which is
Right.
creative like myself. It's actually really easy to do. So I need to take in some data points from other people to say, okay, that idea is good, that one not so much.
So would you advise people, even if they're putting on smaller events, maybe, 100 people, 500 people, what kind of advice would you give them or tips would you give them about surveying pre, post, both, like what we're talking about?
I think it's similar. You want to
Yeah.
know before and after, what did they think? You're wanting to have conversations. The smaller the event is, the more important it is to know the people that are coming.
Right.
It's a super small event. I want to know everybody.
Right.
I want to know something about the people coming so that when they get there, I have a chance to meet them and
Mhm.
introduce them to others. The larger the event gets, the more I need other people involved
Right.
with that. But yeah, I think surveys, and that it's not always just a written,
Mhm.
fill in the blank or, fill in the bubble kind of survey. Sometimes it's just, getting on a phone call or getting in a focus group. You
What do
know,
you think about getting, like Jessica Phillips does this at her event at Social Media Week Lima, like that you and I were speaking at. Um, Having a place set up where attendees can, go live in front of a camera and almost give kind of a testimonial about the event or their experience. Is that something that you feel is important as well?
I think it's a great idea. I don't think it's essential, but I think it's a great idea, and it's really helpful for marketing.
Right.
She
It's a
now
great way
has
to get content, right?
testimonials for next year, and we do that as well. We create
Mhm.
reels of customers and sponsors and speakers talking about the event so that we can market it for next year. So I think if you plan on doing the event more than once, getting testimonials is absolutely essential, and video is a great way to do it.
Sure is. Yes. All right. So let's kind of back up to when we were talking about not having boring events. Maybe would you be willing to share 2 or 3 sort of little tips about not having a boring event? Like, maybe you have a creative idea about a certain something you should do. What's something kind of off the top of your head would you share with our listeners?
Well, what I like to do is let's take some things that are boring about events in general,
Mhm.
and let's reimagine it for your experience. So
I
for me,
love the word reimagine.
one of the most boring experiences, in my opinion, at events is you've gotten to the event, you go to the registration table or whatever they call it, check in, you get your name badge, and then you're standing there and you're wondering, what do I do now?
Right.
And that can be one of the most awkward moments within an event. And that awkwardness could go away very quickly, or it could last for quite a while, depending on the event. And I
Mhm.
went to an event one time where there were 100,000 people there. I
Wow.
won't name it here, but
Wow.
I've talked to the organizers of it. This doesn't happen anymore. And I got my name badge, and it was in this tent. And I walk out, and I was overwhelmed. They
Mhm.
gave me a book. Literally, it felt
A
like
book?
it was almost as big as my book.
Not this book.
No, it was a book. It was their guide, and it had 76 pages of information about the event, and some of it was sponsor stuff. I mean, it was a magazine,
Mhm.
um, and it had all the details of everything you could possibly want to know. Well, I didn't know I need to be prepared for that event. Okay,
Right.
I wasn't a speaker. I was a guest, but I did not realize that I needed to spend like a week making a plan for this event. So it'd have been nice to have had that book prior to checking in. So that moment, though, after walking through, grabbing my badge, grabbing a bag of goodies, whatever they gave me, I don't know if they had any at this event.
Mhm.
You're standing there wondering what's next. That's the place. That to me is one of those moments that could be incredibly boring, isolating. If you didn't come with a group, and a lot of us don't go to events with a group, we come by ourselves. So let's
Mhm.
reimagine that. What if you got through and you got your name badge and you walk out of that proverbial tent? What if there's someone there saying, "Hey, Mr. Rashawn," or we'll go with you, Kate. "Hi, Kate. So glad that you're here. Would you like a cup of coffee? Oh, look at this. It has your name on it. Um, would who would you like to meet? I'd love to know a little bit about your goals for the event, Kate. Who would you like to meet today? What's important for you to learn this week?" And they engage you in conversation, and then they don't just engage you in conversation. They say, "Oh, well, I just met Bob over here. Kate, I think you would love to meet Bob because he's also interested in coffee."
Mhm.
Um, just making that
Yeah,
part
right.
up.
Yes, you're right.
So it's simple. It's relationship building, but you've got people there that's their job to take away the awkwardness of that moment, and their job is to lead you to the next experience, and ideally a couple of things. Oh, you're interested in learning about coffee brewing.
Mhm.
Just go with the coffee theme here for a
Yes.
minute. Well, there's this amazing session happening this afternoon where they're going to do coffee tasting, and we've got three different manufacturers who are going to be there teaching their different arts. You might really enjoy that session. Had you thought about going to that?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, they've given you some information based on your interest, and they've introduced you to somebody who's a fellow coffee lover. Now you don't feel quite so isolated.
Right.
So that's just one very simple thing, is to reimagine how can we take away the awkwardness of that particular moment.
So would you call them like a greeter or a like, I mean, because obviously you'd wanna get all these people in advance to give them this
Yeah,
mission, so to speak, to help
it's
people
more than
feel
greeters. I'm
okay.
looking for connectors. So
Connectors, great
we
word.
do have
Okay.
we have greeters. Their job is just to make you feel welcome.
Okay.
And they are there. They're trying to bring energy. They're welcoming you. But I have a group that their job is to build connections. We
Okay.
call them the connections crew.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and so their job is more networking. So
Okay.
these are people who love to introduce people to others. So
Okay.
that's like a core passion. They almost can't help it. They meet you and they're all of a sudden thinking about Bob and Melinda and whoever else that you would love to connect with. And
Mhm.
so they're doing that instinctively. And so when you've got people like that, I call them yeast in the book,
Yeah,
because they are one of those features that cause the whole event to rise.
right.
You've
I
got
love
people
that.
that are circulating in the event. They're intentionally mixing around and meeting people and introducing those people to somebody else.
Mhm.
When that starts happening at scale, and that can happen no matter the size of event that you have,
Right.
a 20-person event, a 100-person event, 500, 5,000. If you've got the right number of people, which, yeast is usually like 1 part per 100.
Yeah.
The bigger you get, I don't think you have to do it quite at that scale.
Right.
The smaller you are, it doesn't necessarily have to be 5 per 20, but
Mhm.
you do need at least a couple people who are super connectors who just do it, and you might be that person yourself. And
Yeah.
so give yourself permission to strategically place yourself where that awkward moment might happen.
It's so interesting that you bring this up, like that moment where you get the badge and then people don't know what to do. And I guess I would call that like a blind spot. Like we need to be aware of our blind spots, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't even know what those blind spots are because when you're the one that's planning the event and you're in the throes of getting all of it organized and everything, sometimes you miss those blind spots. So I think it's really interesting that you just kind of identified that as a blind spot for people who are putting on events. Let's take that same let's take that same idea and put it in the context of virtual events. So like, and not necessarily a hybrid event, but a virtual event only.
Mhm.
What would be a way to sort of maybe kind of have see a blind spot there when everybody's kind of coming into the room and all of that? What might you suggest?
So, and this is just kind of best practice. You didn't do this, but a lot of virtual events start and they think they need to wait for everybody to show up.
Right. Yeah.
So, but when people go back and watch the recording, they don't want to see you awkwardly waiting for everyone to
Right.
show.
Oh, it's 3 more minutes. We'll give some people some time.
Let's wait till 5 more people show.
Yeah, exactly. I hate that.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's a bad practice. But I think putting that aside, assuming you already know
Mhm.
to do that, I think it is greeting people as soon as you see them and creating that connection for them right away. But knowing this, so when we're presenting on stage, there's the rule of 7, which means every 7 minutes you need to be mixing up your content, moving on stage, telling a story, doing something different. It's probably more frequent than that. That's what it used to be. And
Mhm.
that's just based on how often do advertisers pop on TV. If you're watching TV or anything that uses advertisements,
Mhm.
usually it's about every 7 minutes that they're going to put an advertisement in there because they want to mix it up. It's pattern interrupt. You've
Right.
got a pattern interrupt. I think online you actually have to do it more frequently
Mhm.
because I don't know how many tabs you've got open right now. I've got
Um,
2, 4, 6, 8,
I've
10,
got 8
11.
open.
Yeah, I've got 11. So what's keeping me from going and looking at one of those right now if I'm watching a virtual event? Hopefully you're getting people to say, you know what, I'm all in, and you're doing something early that gets them to invest.
Right.
So this technology doesn't let us do it. But if we were on Zoom, I don't want to get people into a breakout group and meeting some people and setting some intentions of why are you here? Why
Mhm.
is it important that you're in this conversation right now? What are you going to get out of this so that they've got the desire to keep looking for that thing that you've promised them?
Yes, exactly.
If we told them at the start of this conversation, you guys are going to get something out of this conversation that's going to change the way you think about events.
Mhm.
Make sure you stick around because
Mhm.
Phil's got this knowledge bomb that he's going to drop. And I'm setting myself up.
Which you already are because that's what people are saying.
Yeah, right.
No
But I think
surprise.
that's yeah, but I think if you create that intention and that connection between what their need is and what you're gonna offer,
Right.
now they're gonna be more invested.
Right.
The more things you can get people doing using the senses is super important. So virtually, I mean, I could actually have sent you, we could have sent everybody a gift that
Right.
showed up at their door right before this event, and they could have opened a box that had lunch in it. Now, all of a
Yes.
sudden, we're getting them tasting and smelling and feeling along with seeing and hearing. We could have
Mhm.
done that. And back
Absolutely.
during COVID, people were doing that frequently. Like, DoorDash was delivering a lot of things to people for these live events, and people were sending out bottles of wine and all kinds
Yeah.
of amazing things that we can no longer afford to do. But
Well,
um,
I've even been to some virtual events where they do send you like a swag box in advance, and they'll send you an email saying, "Don't open it until we all are out together." So if a friend of mine, actually my business coach, her name is Julie Miller Davis. She's here in Colorado Springs. She puts on an annual event in October called Unstuck, and
mm,
she's a productivity training coach. So she's helping you to, as Julie would never say, manage your time because we all have the same amount of time and we can't manage it, but how to be more productive, how to create new habits and
mm,
reframe and all of that. but she does send out a swag box, and then people can open it like on Zoom, because it is a hybrid event. She's in person in a building and it's virtual, but so the people online are kind of opening it. But it's a great way to make everybody connected and invested in being there, and makes them feel a part of something more than just sitting a bunch of talking heads and the Brady Bunch
Yeah,
windows.
I think the more you can getting them doing something in their environment.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think stories can do it too.
I agree.
So let me just tell you a quick story and watch what
Okay.
to you. Okay. So when I was in college, I spent 7 months in Kenya. And for part of more than half that time, I lived on a sugar plantation where they were growing the sugar and they had a refinery.
Mhm.
The refinery was just down the road from the village where I was staying. And when they're refining sugar, they use sulfur to make it turn white. So,
Oh, I didn't even know that.
and I don't know if you know this, but sulfur smells like rotten
Oh, it
eggs.
does, believe me. I
So
know.
when the winds were blowing just right, that sulfur smell would permeate our little village where I was staying. And I remember waking up one day to the smell of sulfur and my stomach turned sick. Now, to this very day, if I smell rotten eggs or sulfur, I am immediately taken back
I'll
to
bet.
that village in Kenya and feeling sick. And I can see the family coming to me with their platter of bananas that they gave me,
Oh,
thinking
wow.
that that was going to make me feel better. That makes me feel sick too. I love bananas, except when I've smelled rotten sulfur. Now, I can imagine everybody listening right now has some smell that has that same kind of triggering effect for you.
A smell memory.
Put it in the chat. If there's something that when you smell it, it's like this negative memory for you, and you can smell it right now and it takes you back to a memory. I'd love to see what people say. But
Yeah.
by doing that, what does it bring up for you, Kate?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny you brought up the sulfur, because when the minute you said that, you took me back to my very first apartment that I had a roommate for. We rented this little tiny apartment in Vermont, and the water smelled like sulfur, and it turned everything brown. So when you took a shower, it was like taking a shower in rotten eggs. And I put up with it for about 2 or 3 days. And it was my first apartment where I'd moved out of my parents' house.
Mhm.
And I ended up going back to my parents' house for about 3 months to take a shower every day, because I couldn't stand the sulfur smell. And then we eventually were able to break the lease, because it was, you couldn't even live like that. So that's definitely a very strong memory of mine for a story for smell.
Well, but now see what I've done is I've brought your life experience into a conversation that
Yes,
brings even more bearing. And obviously, that's a negative example of
right,
smell, but we could talk about positive examples of smell. So I don't even have to give you something to smell to make you smell something.
right.
So,
We
positively
could go
speak.
back to your example of the yeast,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
reminds me of homemade bread, which reminds me of my grandmother coming every year at Christmas, and I made homemade bread with her, and it was just one of my best Christmas memories.
Yeah. And for me, whenever I went to my grandmother's in Iowa, she lived on a farm. And when she baked bread, I mean, she baked bread all the time.
Yeah, right.
So I'm taken to that kitchen. I'm taken to the fact they had a half an acre dedicated to their garden outside. And I'd go pick fresh vegetables and we bring them in and we cook them straight from the garden, straight to the table. And it was amazing. So very positive memories associated with that.
Bob just shared, my father was triggered to light and smoke a cigarette when he smelled house paint.
Yeah.
That's funny. I didn't know that, Bob. Okay, so um, let's. I want to know if it's. I hope it's okay to ask you this, and maybe you have a story or two. But a lot of people listening on the replay are going to be very familiar with social media marketing world. Now, I must confess, I have registered 4 times to go to social media marketing world, and every time something has come up and I could not go. And so I've never been, and I'm still bound and determined, and maybe this coming year will be my year. But share some. I'm wondering if you have a story or two about sort of a behind the scenes planning for this big event. Something that people might be surprised by or delighted by that they just wouldn't know unless you shared it here.
Phew. Maybe give me a little bit more to go from
Okay. So
'cause I'm
like
coming
let's talk
immediately to mind.
about maybe in the planning from the standpoint of maybe you're creating a certain type of experience that you haven't done before, or you're gonna be testing out some kind of a new experience that people can have when they're, I don't know, between sessions or whatever. Um, what kind of the either something went wrong or something went great?
Or when I smelled house paint.
Or when
I
you yeah.
I'll go with that one, Bob. Unfortunately, that takes me back to college when I tried to be a house painter for part of a summer, and that was a bad experience. Um, so let me just give you a couple examples.
Okay.
One is, and this story is in the book, but in 2016, we were getting ready to move from being a single hotel event to
Mhm,
being what's called a citywide, which means you've got people staying in lots of hotels and you're doing it at a central location
mhm.
like a convention center. And so we were asking ourselves questions back to our earlier conversation about thinking about the customer journeys. And we asked ourselves, what's going to cause someone to leave the building and maybe never come back?
Right.
So we said, well, one of those might be they want to get some work done. Another might be they want to take a nap, and the third might be they need to go get their toothbrush because they're talking to a lot of people and their breath might smell. So the first two are pretty easy. We created lots of spaces where they could work. We created a quiet zone where they could kick up their feet and people were told not to talk. Which,
Mhm.
by the way, I want to rename that the antisocial zone, which
Oh
I
my
just think
god,
is
that would be so fun.
hilarious.
Yeah, that would be
At a
great. No.
social media conference, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's
Um,
that's pretty funny,
I
actually.
don't know if we will, but I think it'd be funny. But then the third one was a little bit more like, well, we're not a hotel. We don't provide toothbrushes and toothpaste. Why should we do that? But then we said, well, we should because we don't want to have them to leave.
Right.
And so that's a thought process that we went through and it paid off because we know many
So what did you do?
stories.
Put them in, like, their little goodie bag?
So no, what we did is we put baskets in the bathrooms. So
Oh, okay.
one lady's story became famous because she came from Denmark and she needed a toothbrush and wanted to go find a drugstore. And we said, well, you don't have to go to the drugstore, just come down the hallway. Well, that story has been told many times, and it's one of my favorites of taking something that could go wrong. We
Yeah.
imagined a solution, and it went more right than we ever would have thought because it's been on. Jay Bear talks about it on his podcast, and many others do too. It's like they even have toothbrushes in the bathroom. It's like, and we might not this year. We didn't last year.
Mhm.
That was an oversight last year, but this year it might be on purpose that we don't
Right.
because we said, you know what, there's a different problem that we need to solve.
Well, and
Um,
it makes so much sense to just have them in the bathroom instead of having to create a whole 'nother, like, how are we gonna get this into the hands of people, and are we gonna put it in a swag bag, which creates another whole layer of work.
yeah, and the first year after the pandemic, we didn't do it because we felt like, you know what, people don't want anything to be touched
Exactly.
by others.
Germs.
They
Yeah.
don't even want to be brushing their teeth in the presence of others. So we still had them available that people
Right.
could grab.
Right.
But we're going to do it differently in the future. Um, yeah, just a whole different example.
Right.
Today, I was on a call.
Okay.
This is like real time. Okay,
Yes.
we're being real here.
Yes.
We're having a conversation about the end of an event. I mean, tell me this, Kate, because this is in my mind. This is one of the places that most event planners don't spend enough time thinking about. When you get done with a conference or an event, that final keynote happens, and then they say, "Okay, I hope to see you next year." As soon as that is said, at most events, it's just kind of like, "Okay,
Yeah.
I guess we're done."
Yeah.
And not, I'll say this: 8 out of 10 times, that's what we've done. The first one, very first time we had a conference, it ended on a high note because the closing note keynote speaker had an activity that he had people doing at the end that kept
Okay.
people around for a long time.
Mhm.
He was brilliant in what he did.
Mhm.
Um, we didn't do that on purpose. He did it, and it had a great effect.
Right.
And then Mark Schaefer was our closing
I was
keynote in
just gonna say Mark Schaefer
2019.
was your closing note speaker one year. And he's
Yeah, and
always good.
he ended it with a fireworks show. I mean, I
Really?
created the fireworks show, but he wanted to end with a fireworks moment, and so we kinda collaborated, and I created that, and we had confetti guns going off, and it was a moment to remember.
I'll bet.
Um, some people negatively because their PTSD got triggered, which that's a whole
Mhm.
different story we didn't anticipate.
Right.
We've gotta think about that. But that was memorable, but all the other years, and I was the MC for the first 6 or 7 years. 6
Mhm.
years? I think 6 years. And I would end it saying, "Hey, we hope to see you next year. And the band would play a song.
Mhm.
But really what happened was people got up and left. Now, some years they stuck around and they talked for a little while,
Right.
but many times they just get up, they leave, and there's no one there to greet them. So
Mhm.
this meeting was thinking about how do we make that a little bit more like when Disney ends their experience? You see that fireworks show,
Mhm.
and then you're walking out of the park, and all the cast is there along the way as you're going out, and they like to say they're giving a goodnight kiss. Uh,
Oh.
it's like, can we give you a little bit of a warm embrace? We're not
Mhm.
going to hug you. We're not
Right.
going to actually kiss you, but we want you to feel like that
That's
feeling
what we did.
inside. Hey,
Yeah.
we appreciate that you've been here. There's closure.
Right.
And so we're having that meeting, just thinking through how do we not repeat 8 out of 10 years,
Right.
where we didn't give them that feeling. We didn't give
Right.
them that sense of closure as they're leaving of we really appreciate you being here. And whether they come back or not, we want them to leave feeling good about the experience that they just had and that we appreciate them. So can we get all the staff
Mhm.
around? Can we create a moment that they're going to talk about?
Well, I'm excited to see how that plays out.
I'm
That's
too.
that's really interesting. Okay, so one of the things that, I loved about when I met you in Lima back in June is, and I was a speaker, you were a speaker, there were several, is, prior to the event, they had asked us to select our music for our
Mm,
walk-on music.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so I had a song and everybody had a song. And so when Chad introduced you, we he had this little toy saxophone, and he introduced you, and it sounded like, because we weren't looking at the back because everybody was usually coming up from the side of the stage, it sounded like this music was coming out of the saxophone, and I looked to my left and there you are playing your saxophone, walking yourself up on stage.
It wasn't
Ye-
that song, but yes, I did.
Yay! Oh, I'm so glad that you did that. Thank you, Phil. Anyway, but that was another, and even just you doing that, first of all, it's you, right? It's part of you. It's like talk about authentic because you love to play the sax, but it also made it memorable. I've still hear people talking about, oh my God, Phil Mershon played his way up on stage with his saxophone. So that was another that was an unforgettable moment. And I mean, you may not have even thought of it that way.
Well, I did and I didn't. So, when they asked me that question, "What song do you want to play when you're coming on?" I went online and I asked everybody on Facebook. I said, "What song should I play?" And someone in there said, "Phil, you should play the Pink Panther." I said, "Oh, that's brilliant. Why didn't I
That is
think
what you played, isn't it?
it is what I played?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I played the Pink Panther, walked my way on, and Chad said, "Well, no, I've gotta act like I'm playing it," and he wanted me to be backstage, but I said, "No, I need to walk on. I need
Oh,
to
it
come
was great.
to the room where people are like, 'Where is this coming from?'" And, make my way on stage, so that was a lot of fun,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, that we had there for sure.
Well, it was an unforgettable moment. All right, so, I want to, as we wind down here, I wanna put up some information for our, listeners and also, the people watching on the replay. So, where is the best place that people can, go to get your book?
Well, I've got a site, there it is right there, philmershon.com/purchase that lists all the main places you can buy it online here in the States. If you're overseas, you may need to just look for Unforgettable Phil Mershon, and you'll be able to find stores where it's available. Amazon's all over the globe, so for sure you can go there,
Yep,
but I don't know all the places in all the countries. So, but that's a good starting place if you're in the US, and you can at least find the Amazon link and it will take you where you need to go.
great, and I would imagine that you probably wouldn't mind if people would connect with you on LinkedIn,
LinkedIn is
um,
fine,
and Facebook,
Facebook's
right?
fine. Yeah, and on my website, which I think you're gonna show,
Yep.
top are all the links to all the places where I've got social presence. I
Yes.
am on TikTok, but I'm not active, so don't worry about me there.
I still can't get myself to do TikTok. I put
No,
it on,
keep
I've taken it
away
off.
with
I put it
it.
on, I've taken it off.
Yeah, it's there, but don't bother.
And if anybody wanted to reach out to you, is it okay if we give your email?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
just tell me that you found me here, that you heard me on Coffee with Kate.
Yes.
That way I have some context and I'm glad to answer any questions or help you if I can.
So, if anybody has any other questions about events or anything, or any comments they'd like to make with Phil, please put them in the chat. I just wanted to really thank you again, Phil. It was really special having you on, and I'm very honored that you gave me the time. For people who are been watching my Coffee with Kate show for the last 5 years, I usually only did it in the summertime, and I just recently created a podcast, which is Coffee with Kate Brewing Business Brilliance for Entrepreneurs. And I launched at the end of July. It's on the eWomen Network podcast network. And so actually this episode, Phil, will actually be turned into a podcast episode too in a couple weeks.
All
So
right.
people be able to hear it on all of the main podcast channels. So but
So we're gonna write a original song for you right now.
oh, you are. Oh
That
my
will
God.
be the first submission for your theme song for your podcast, because obviously it's going to be, we'll get more. But tell me a few words about what you hope people will feel when they watch your podcast or listen to your
Um, I want people to feel like they know how to own their personal brand and their personal story.
podcast. Okay.
Like they own it, like they know that they are the expert that they are, because I think a lot of people think if they put themselves out there too much, it's too braggy. But when
Mm,
they tie it into their story and they tie it into how they help people, then they can really own their expertise.
okay. So
Let's
brewing
and
confidence
yep,
with Kate.
visibility, because that's what I help my clients is to
Yeah.
achieve, to amplify their reach online and off. Bob just said confidence. Thank you,
Yeah.
Bob.
All right. So visibility and confidence, amplifying message,
Mhm.
stories.
Yep.
All right. This is just going to be a little bit of improv response
You're the
that may
best.
be useful to you, or it may just be a moment.
No,
That
I'm glad we're recording.
yeah. All right. Here we go.
Oh my god, I think you made me tear up. No one's ever done anything like that. Thank you so much.
Well, my gift to you.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you so much, Phil. It's been such a delight having you on my show. So thank you again for making the time and taking the time. And I hope we'll continue to stay in touch. And everybody, please get Phil's book, Unforgettable. It's really good. I'm about halfway through.
All right. Thank you,
Okay.
Kate.
All
Thank
right.
you,
Stay
everybody.
stay on. I'm gonna end the stream, but just stay on if you would, and so we can chat and say goodbye in the green room. And thank you everybody for tuning in, and thanks for joining in on the replay. Please put any questions you have if you're watching the replay in the feed, tag Phil or me, and we will answer your questions if you have them in the replay. Thank you.